So we're now continuing with our chronological survey of Israeli and Palestinian women activism in peace building, and we're now taking into consideration what happens during the first Intifada and afterwards until the year 2000, the first few years of the new century. So, as in previous slides that we've seen, I would like to start with a quote by Sophia Richter-de Vroo from the same article that we have seen in the slides on Palestinian women's activism, women's committees. And here she says, Sophia Richter-de Vroo, she says, there are essentially two alternative approaches to gender and conflict resolution, an agency-based and a structural approach. These two basic categories can be found in both feminist literature, discussing women's strategies for gender development and positive social gender change, and in conflict resolution literature, discussing strategies for peace development and positive political change. When looking at the more recent literature on gender and conflict resolution, i.e. literature that combines insights from both disciplines, one can detect a tendency, particularly in the mainstream literature, to follow an agency-based approach, focusing on individual women as agents for change and or their individual perception and qualities as peacemakers. So I think this is really very interesting in the sense that what we have seen so far is how Israeli first and then Palestinian women separately had worked to change from below their practical gender interests in the hope of addressing a more strategic gender interest that is to bring change, social and cultural change in their respective societies. Given the permanence of the conflict and its growing pervasiveness in all spheres of society, excuse me, it is interesting now to see what happens with the first Intifada, and if, as Hanan Ashrawi had said in a quote a couple of slides ago, if it is true that Palestinian women helped Israeli women make the connection between gender issues and geopolitical issues, or whether it's not the case. But anyway, what was the result, whether the two groups started to collaborate or not. What happened was that certainly, as we've seen in the presentation on Women in Black, what was going on during the first Intifada, that is the repression of Palestinians in the occupied territories, propelled women's groups to protest publicly, to go public, if you want, those who were opposed to the occupation. As we've seen with Women in Black, these were mainly Israeli women, Jewish Israeli women, and some Palestinian Israelis also joined. But the first thing that we should remark is that the cooperation or the organization of women's movements were always, at this point at least, was extremely informal. There were very few financial resources. They were all given by private funding. There were no offices, headquarters. Meetings were held in activist homes, in public places. There was no hierarchical organization, no spokespersons, and so on. These various, this mobilization of women took really different forms. There were protest groups, groups promoting solidarity with Palestinians, and dialogue groups. And this involved both Israeli and Palestinian women. And I'm going to talk here about, I'm just going to mention actually one, which is in fact Shani, Israeli Women Against the Occupation, that was a political group, not only a protest group. It was based in Jerusalem. It was mainly women from the feminist movement, and in particular from the radical left. And it was women who wanted to open a debate with female Palestinian representatives. And in this sense, again, the quote by Hanan Ashrawi makes, I would like to recall that quote when she said it was Palestinian women that stimulated somehow Israeli women to contact us, meaning Palestinian women, to confront us on a feminist agenda. And this is a little bit what happened. The group, the Shani group, was made of expert political activists that were very much against the occupation, the regime, and the consequences of the Israeli occupation on Palestinian civilians. And so it was a particularly radical group, also because it confronted Israeli feminism that withdrew and was unable to confront, was unwilling to confront the issue of the occupation very often. So Shani is a particularly interesting group. Part of the material of Shani is available in the archive, the Israel Left Archive, which is the website of the International Institute for Social History in Amsterdam. But I think that to go on and to see when and how these two groups of women, or these various groups of Israeli and Palestinian women, managed to meet one another, it was finally in 1989, so 2 years after the beginning of the Intifada, in Brussels, in an encounter entitled "Give Peace a Chance, Women Speak Out," and that was convened by David and Simone Susskind in Brussels. That convened this meeting, inviting prominent Israeli and Palestinian women peace activists, and this helped the beginning of an ongoing dialogue between women activists. We have various testimonies. Zahira Kamal, for example, on one of the newsletters of the Palestinian women's committees that we've seen in some previous slides, she wrote, "The meeting in Brussels is the first to which I have actively participated, with such a large number of Palestinian and Israeli women attending. I have always felt the need to take courageous steps in the dialogue with Israelis to explain our viewpoint." And here, the two delegations somehow managed to find seven common points that they considered the basis for cooperation. Among them, of course, the end of the occupation, the right to self-determination of the Palestinians, the Palestinian nation, and the right of all peoples in the region to live in freedom, dignity, and security. And this very same meeting, which really left a mark is often remembered in the interviews and in the memories of these activists, is also accounted for in the reports of women in black. Now, there are other groups that try to work in a more symbolic way. With the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you have scores of programs, whether of women, of children, of cooperation, that try to leave a trace of the importance of joint activities and so on. When we look at women's activism, we find as well many other activities, and one was particularly novel in 1988 when it was first organized. That is the embroidering of a huge peace quilt that was rolled out in front of the Knesset on the 6th of the Israeli Parliament on the 6th of June 1988 for the 21st anniversary of the Six-Day War as a protest against the occupation. This is not the original quilt, but another one, and this image comes from the website of this Canadian artist that I have indicated here, Sima Elizabeth Schifrin, and so all these activities continued in parallel. But I go back to the meeting in Brussels, as this meeting in Brussels was carried out every year until 1991, this time no longer under the auspices of David and Simone Susskind, but under the auspices of the European Union. And from these meetings, various other centers and activities sprang out. Among them, 9 Palestinian women activists established another center called the Jerusalem Center for Women, that had the aim of empowering Palestinian women in civil society, in politics, and within the peace process, so linking gender issues and national issues and peace-building issues. But from these very same meetings, there was also an Israeli national feminist organization called Bat Shalom, and this was of Jewish and Palestinian Israeli women working together for a just resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In 1984, these two organizations, the Jerusalem Center on the Palestinian side, the Bat Shalom on the Israeli side, converged in the establishment of the Jerusalem Link, which is an organization that now comprises the 2 women's organizations. So this is, again, an umbrella organization, if you want, for 2 big branches that, however, serve as a model of coexistence between the two groups. The situation evolved, despite the fact that the political situation involved, in the sense that it worsened. The organizational activities, or the networking activities of these organizations improved. And in 2003, the 2 groups of the Jerusalem Link joined the another association, which is the International Women's Peace Activist Network, which again aimed at strengthening links between the 2 parties in conflict by establishing contact between different international parties, promoting the defense of civil rights, forming pressure groups to influence decision makers to hear the voice of women. So again, we have this framework of the peace building from below and the peacemaking from above, and the need to have these 2 dimensions integrated somehow. And this came at a time when, immediately after, a few years after, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 1325, which is an earthquake, if you want, in the field of women's activism and of gender equality. In fact, among the various links that you have listed for this unit, you will find a few clips from a website which is called Social TV, that shows the meetings of various Israelis and Palestinian women in trying to implement, or in how to make viable and to make real the provisions of Resolution 1325 of the UN Security Council. So, given that I mentioned this resolution as an earthquake in gender activism and in women's activism, actually, I think we should read together its summary in a way. So the UN Resolution 1325 of the year 2000 is a resolution on women and peace and security. And the resolution reaffirms the important role of women in the prevention and resolution of conflicts, peace negotiations, peace building, peacekeeping, humanitarian response, and in post-conflict reconstruction. And it also stresses the importance of their equal participation and full involvement in all efforts for the maintenance and promotion of peace and security. Resolution 1325 urges all actors to increase the participation of women and incorporate gender perspectives in all United Nations peace and security efforts. It also calls on all parties to conflict to take special measures to protect women and girls from gender-based violence, particularly rape and other forms of sexual abuse in situations of armed conflict. The resolution provides a number of important operational mandates with implication for member states and the entities of the United Nations system. So I really invite you to go and watch on the social TV clips that are linked on the website of this course to see how women discuss the implications of the UN Resolution 1325 and how they worked to make it applicable and useful for the framework of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Thank you. Goodbye.